Well, it's a new year and a happy one, I hope. But by gum, it's going to be a difficult one, isn't it? We start, as we did the last year, with Donald Trump in the headlines, illegally kidnapping, let's call it for what it is, the President of Venezuela. And now all the ramifications of that occupying all the bandwidth of every world leader, with let's just chuck in the threat to Greenland too. So what's it all about? We'll have a look at that. The Scottish elections, there's going to be 5 months of a campaign. Where will it leave independence at the end of all of that? Will it be high profile? Will it not matter really what the result is? Because after all, we still can't quite get it over the line on our own. How will all the parties fare? That's what we're discussing today in the first podcast of 2026. So those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Lesley Riddoch podcast. It's the first one of 2026. Happy New Year, Lesley.
Yes, and the same to you, my dear.
Yes, or should I say happy regulated campaign spending period. Although that technically kicks in tomorrow, the 7th of January. And how exciting it is to be in the official start of the Holyrood 2026 campaign. Woohoo!
Well, indeed. I was on Saturday's Good Morning Scotland, actually, which is a bit of a livener, on the 3rd of January, talking about, the year ahead in politics. And I took with me this blimmin' leaflet from Reform, which came in, actually pretty much on hogmanay. And I'm kind of thinking, if these guys are actually banging this stuff out now, where are they going to be on the spending limits, by the time we get to an actual election? Although having said that, the Lib Dems are, pretty constant in this neck of the woods as well.
But you see, that's you want everything out before the 7th of January. So
right,
that's
smart.
Probably being delivered to you by an actual person, not an activist, but by some kind of delivery method, Royal Mail or other. So that doesn't count. That's a long campaign. And we're now starting the short campaign, the actual regulated
Well,
period.
And just while we're at it, I know I'm jumping the gun and all the rest of it, but I actually did read it. And it's got the usual stuff, all the sort of net zero's crazy and kind of, immigration, far too much immigration. But away, down the list, it says, we will cut the public spending bill that is such a burden on hardworking, tax-paying Scottish people. Right, cut the public spending bill. Just remember that, everybody, because that's, we're going to improve the NHS. How are they going to do that? By reducing waste. I remember a Monty Python sketch like this, that you could cure the world of all known diseases by simply becoming a doctor and telling everyone what to jolly well do. I mean, the lot of the supporters, this is the same thing that happened in Finland with the far-right government. A lot of the supporters of parties like Reform and the Finns party will be people who might well depend on public spending a lot. So, I hope that will get as much scrutiny as everything else in the agenda. Right, that wasn't where we should have started.
No, anyway, how was your hogmanay?
That.
Although you had a tragedy in the family beforehand, which set you off on a slightly bad note, sadly. I mean,
given human tragedies, it wasn't. You would have to say it's not a tragedy, but it was. I mean, I had 3 cats last year. One of them, who was 24, died, which is a fair innings, actually. So the 2 other ones I thought were kind of young by comparison, 16 and 17, which I now realise is not young in cat years. And Charlie, who was a game wee bloomin' cat. I mean, the neighbour, we've got badgers around here, big style. And the neighbour actually showed me a video thing they'd put up on a wee bridge over a burn. And there it was, Badger, Charlie. I mean, she was out every night on the prowl like a male cat, which is hence the name. The girls decided she was a bit tomboyish, so she got the Charlie name. Anyway, she just wasn't eating, and I tried to take her to the vet, and she'd got a cancerous lump and had to decide what to do on Wednesday because the vet was closing then until yesterday, Monday, and she would just have got worse and worse. So I had to take her to be put down on Wednesday, which was, very upsetting. Didn't take the cage thing out of the car until earlier yesterday because it's just a bit like she's gone. But pal, Jean Urquhart, who used to run the Cayley place, was over in Ullapool and said, why don't you come up here? Just keep going, keep driving, come up here. So I thought, well, hell, why not? That would be grand. And also you're not sitting moping around here on your own. Wow, what a brilliant time that was.
You're going to make us all jealous now.
It was the utterly classic proper traditional. I mean, the Cayley, all the family, Jock, Rebecca, that's the two bairns, grown-up bairns that are running the place now. Shetland, Jean having moved to Shetland. They've all got the same attitude. They don't do Christmas. So if you want to escape Christmas, you can have a meal that's like a normal meal with no tinsel or anything in the Cayley place. But by gum, they do New Year. So they had some fantastic three live bands. The best, well, the one that I clocked most of was Fraz at the end, which is just a fantastic band, and a Cayley sort of event the night before, and lots of just, talking and blathering to people that you haven't seen for a long time. Genuinely, it still lives up to the name. So that was great. And then a bit of a livener coming back, you'd have to say.
Light dusting of snow.
It was, yes. So it was kind of, you couldn't break between Ullapool and pretty much Inverness, which is, it's about an hour or something. You basically were doing about 30 or 40 and you couldn't break because there were two cars off the road that clearly had at some corner suddenly gone, oh my God, I'm going too fast, brake.
Yeah,
off you go.
That was the wrong time to decide you were going too fast.
Yeah, you have to anticipate everything. And then you sort of need to know the road. And you need to just change gears, basically, to control speed. And then all of that is utterly irrelevant if the guy behind you doesn't do the same, or the person coming the other direction, So it fairly brings it home to you how we are indeed a herd that survive. You can have your own instincts and good luck and everything, but all you need is somebody coming the other way that doesn't. Still, it was glorious. I mean, my God, the place was just glistening. And the lochs you were passing with these deep, angry-looking blues, it brought to my mind, these genuinely are the moody blues, because there was every loch was a different moody kind of blue, with just this absolutely sharp line then against the white of, where the land began. It looked absolutely brilliant. All the animals were about because, they're all out foraging for something to eat. So it was an incredible journey, actually, if a little bit hairy.
Well, it sounds fantastic.
Your own.
Well, I'm very into New Year, and Mrs. Thompson doesn't come from a tradition, or a family tradition of doing New Year. And in fact, every time I rouse people on New Year's Day to go and first foot the Rellies, they get very vexed. And we don't do that, I said, well, I bloody well do. So look, I've made shortbread. It's been, lovingly put in this thing, and it's got ribbons tied around it. We're going out, and that's an end of it. We need to find some people to first fit. And every year, without fail, when I go to my mother-in-law, she says, well, we don't go in for that sort of thing, And I said, well, I'm here. Tough. It's happening. So we had a very nice party with friends, although the kids had all got sick because everybody else was kind of coming to the end of their winter illnesses, or a temporary respite. At least we've all knocked it up a gear and all having temperatures and what have you again this week. But it took us 15 minutes for them to scoot down to the pals' house for the bells, and it took nearly 50 minutes for them to do the reverse journey, crying their little eyes out, the poor darlings, and absolutely roasting toasting. If there'd been a snow here, the eldest could have quite happily cleared it just with force of personality and the fact that she was boiling up. So we finally got them home. Luckily, Mummy discovered a bag of chocolates in her handbag, so they were getting sort of 2 chocolates. If they did a scoot for 2 lampposts, they could have a chocolate, and then scoot for another 2 lampposts, they get another chocolate. And then we finally got into our street. I had to sort of pick one up and carry it at the full length, and then run back to get the second one as they were, this is the worst thing ever. Oh.
Lordy. I suppose we could easily get sidetracked into, it wasn't like that when we were bairns. And
well, it wasn't. I
water down to make it slidey.
I had fond memories of New Year's Eve and going around everybody. In fact, a great story of one of our listeners still gets castigated for it because of you got to bring your own carry out. He brought his own carry out, but he wasn't for sharing it, and he still gets it cast up to him sort of, or was that 40 odd or 30 odd years later. And all these kind of traditional things, which I think are really important and are much more Scottish. And of course, as lots of these online memes and Alistair Heather and what have you been saying recently, Scotland doesn't have particular Christmas traditions because Christmas was banned for ages, but we hold, very dearly to hogmanay, and I think that's super important.
Which is probably why I don't know if you noticed somewhere along the line, ScotRail got pelters. I mean, it feels like 100 years ago, but it was probably last week.
Oh yes, I definitely did notice this. My blood was...
In fact, you sent it to me.
My dander was up. I thought, this is outrageous.
Yeah, they were referring to, some disruption, or all services would be running, or whatever it was, on New Year's Eve. And of course, a lot of people went, replied and said, I think you'll find we call that hogmanay in Scotland, ScotRail. And whatever young whippersnapper was on the other end just came back with, well, I'm sure it's called New Year's Eve as well. Well, fine. I mean, it just beggars belief, actually. Just get with it. This is where you're living, and kind of, I don't know.
Well, this is the mode that you have to take on if you're going to be the social media guy for ScotRail. I find that very unacceptable and very vexing. But particularly the fact that they could sort of double down on it. Oh, that must be an age thing, I think he said at one point.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And I thought, no, it bloody isn't. That's just, this is our tradition. This is what we have here. And we're not having it sort of diluted with your New Year's Eve, Jules Holland hootenanny rubbish. Thank you very much. As I was just about to email Laura Scott to get Paul Henderson Scott's The Englishing of Scotland on DVD and do a deep dive on that. So yes, anyway, but great fun and fantastic snows. We have had a very light sprinkling of snow here, the Sassenachs in East Lothian. But nothing in comparison to the fantasticness that there is in Aberdeenshire and what have you. And just like our friend Mr. Robertson would say, the snow has finally reached Englandshire, so it is actually news now.
Yes, yes, indeed. It's news where they are.
Yes, it's the weather where you are is not the weather either. So yes, it's now hit Englandshire with 100 schools closed. But actually, to
be fair to them, they had a wee bulletin, it was 11 o'clock or something on Radio 4, and they did have somebody on from Aberdeenshire, just very short and to the point, practical. It was a tractor driver who was going out clearing snow, and he made the point, I mean, this will be the only thing everyone gets in touch about, but feel free, everybody, is that if you go in and clear a kind of a big chunk through very deep snow, you actually make it deeper. Because the snow, when it drifts, as it inevitably will if it's not over yet, will find that passage and go, you dancer, somewhere for us to go, and it will actually be back with a vengeance, essentially. So it does make it like you have to do a really pretty major clear around the place for it to make any difference at all. So I'm sure everybody, in Aberdeenshire particularly could write volumes now about exactly what's needed. But of course, everybody has been quite astonished actually at how deep and
so we better like clearing
the
pavements when you've got not very much snow. Actually, that kind of, is it grottle? The sort of icy snow is much safer and easier to walk on. And then there's some older gent with a mission clears his little bit, and you've been walking along quite happy, doopy, and then you get to the bit that he's cleared. Of course, he's only going out in the car, and immediately you're up and landed in a heap because it's completely black ice.
Last year when just that happened, because I was off this morning, and it was a bit of a struggle getting up the hill, but thankfully one of the neighbours actually ordered job lots of rock salt. So each of us, we all chipped in, but we've all got our rock salt thing. And by gum, I was out for half an hour sprinkling it. Watching that rock salt work on ice and snow is like a joy to behold, actually. And I mean, every community should just get their little supplies together. Because what will end up happening is you go out and the main roads are crystal clear, and everybody would go, okay, we're all fine. Just take a wee dab off it, and the second you've got a bit of a slope. Anyway, everybody, Happy New Year, and I hope you're managing to struggle through with whatever snow there is and enjoy it if you can.
Indeed, and certainly having a better New Year than the former President of Venezuela, who's in the clink after being extraordinarily renditioned, although apparently the BBC are not allowing people to call it a kidnap, and oxtered off by the USA in quite a phenomenal turn of events.
Well, it's everything's gobsmacking when it comes to Trump, but this was just. It's partly the gobsmackingness is not just the audacity of kidnapping a foreign president, but the reaction to it, which is, as you say, nobody's able to call a spade, and then the limpest possible response from the British government, the limpest response from most, I've got to say, BBC commentators who are kind of stroking their chins and saying, which is true, that Europe is caught between a rock and a hard place, because if they annoy Trump, he might just not go any further with helping the situation in Ukraine. I mean, we've all forgotten about Gaza by the looks of it, but I mean, it's like having a big, as everybody has said, like a big baby that you've got to kind of keep on side, and you've got to keep Trump's interest in these other conflicts, or what? Well, we're pretty much at or what now. I mean, the Venezuelan thing, I realised I didn't know too much about it, but there's a fantastic piece that's been running on Twitter by a woman called Nikki Barnes. Maybe there's a lot of people following her, but by gum, there's a good exposition of everything. Now, I mean, going through it, it's kind of interesting where people will think Venezuela where this crisis began, because there's no question Venezuela's economy has collapsed. There is corruption. And Maduro is questionable, actually, whether or not he was properly elected. There's been years of dispute about this. But if you look at it from the oil point of view, before 1998, Exxon was the largest company. The American company owned most of Venezuelan oil, and most of the profits were then obviously being siphoned off to Exxon and the States. As a result of all the anger around that, Hugo Chavez was elected, democratically elected, but he became authoritarian. You've got to say, anybody hearing a wee Trump sort of echo in this? He rewrote the constitution to effectively give him the powers of a dictator. Once again, there's nothing so difficult like that. Then in 2002, there was the beginnings of an attempt to dislodge all of, Hugo Chavez and so on by Maria Machado. Now, she is the woman who then got the Nobel Prize just last year. So hold that thought. But that was 2002. And W. Bush managed to support her through creating this National Endowment for Democracy. So that's how he funded her. But she didn't manage to kind of putsch the rest of the guys, the Hugo Chavez bunch. He nationalized Venezuelan oil in 2007. That obviously hacked off the Americans pretty big style. Exxon sued them actually for loss of profits and won $1.4 billion. Questionable whether it ever got paid, though. So there's a completely different sort of situation. The Venezuelans went from having 3 million barrels of oil a year to 700,000. So there was an issue about mismanagement, but they also had massive sanctions applied by the Americans. Starting with Obama, actually, he was hugely against Venezuela. Maduro took over in 2013, and then we cut to, just loads of different attempts to displace him. An alternative president, Guaido, was claimed that he was the president. When you look through the history of recently what's happened in Venezuela, it makes almost any other country look kind of relatively straightforward and well run. There was 2 different presidents recognised as legitimate by different countries. Guaido, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, 60 countries recognised him as president, despite the fact he never ran as one. And Maduro was recognised by 20 countries. So, they had loads of negotiations to try to kind of have some agreement. The Americans, Trump first time round, tried to persuade both of them not to stand so some other third party could come forward. It didn't happen. On and on and on it went. So all of this is relevant because that's the sort of guddle from which now this kind of show of force has been forthcoming. And the bit that is absolutely really very interesting by Nikki Barnes is that it's not just to retrieve the oil that has prompted Trump to move. It's because of US currency rates. What she was observing was that oil is traded in petro, which is US dollars, and across the world, oil is traded in dollars, which artificially inflates that currency and stabilizes the US economy. But the BRICS nations, Brazil, China, Egypt, India, Russia, Iran, South Africa, UAE, the BRICS nations are now trading with each other without the United States and not using dollars. So it seems like the fear of the world's biggest oil producer, Venezuela, well, let's not say oil producer because they've had problems with that, but they've got the biggest oil reserves, right? Is that these guys will actually get the Chinese in to sort out what's going, the problems with their oil industry, and that will all end up being traded not in dollars, which will basically really kind of produce a problem for the US economy if Trump is thinking that far.
Well, exactly, and that's the kind of the major talking point at the moment is he thinking that far, and is this some kind of grand strategic move, or is this, as is normal for Trump, more of a kind of step-by-step transactional thing of we wanted X, so we did Y? I noticed, John Swinney's been very strong on his New Year's speech, saying that obviously Maduro was a pretty abhorrent leader, and there was no doubt that it was an illegitimate regime, and I think that's been pretty clear that was not a free and a fair election, and that the opposition had in fact won a considerable victory over him. But by no means can you see how international law is respected if you just horse into somebody else's country, bypass their military, and arrest a guy and take him to your country to try him for domestic crimes that the USA has made up, rather than supporting democracy. And of course, this doesn't seem to be about any kind of proper regime change or rehabilitation of Venezuela. It's just looking for somebody who's going to do as they're told, or is going to be so terrified of the consequences that they'll play ball in a way that Maduro was too slow to do. So there's no suggestion of bringing in the opposition or paving the way to properly observed elections. He's just anointed the vice president as the de facto leader and told her that she's got to do as she's told.
And I mean, just by the by, the strange thing perhaps is that Maria Machado, who did, remember, win the Nobel Prize and dedicated it to Trump, and she's the one who's been hanging on in there as the head of the opposition since 2002. So that's a long hang. That's 24 years, right? But not her. She wasn't his appointee, Trump's appointee. And I was watching ITN News last night, and one of the correspondents' views on that was that the reason was that Trump thinks she should have refused the Nobel Prize and said it should have gone to him instead. I mean, it's actually chilling to think that you could have anyone that childish with so much power. But the other thing that I watched that was absolutely fascinating was an interview. Again, Channel 4 News coming into its own with this, but a guy they interviewed, Professor David Cole from Georgetown University, really, really straight-speaking guy here, said that what has happened obviously is illegal under international and American law because it doesn't let you go into another country except in self-defense. And he said there's, the previous incursions into Latin America, you could kind of have maybe some sort of contorted, explanation for it. But in this case, there absolutely wasn't a case. And indeed, when the Americans appeared in front of the Security Council yesterday, or was it, or the day before?
Yes, yesterday.
They didn't argue self-defense. So, that takes this is therefore illegal. The argument was we don't want oil reserves controlled by someone else. That's not, so this is like international law gone. And as many people will have pointed out, it opens the door for Russia to move beyond Ukraine, for China to lob into Taiwan. If you can just kind of inch into places because you feel like it, and to be really fair, if you go back to the way Britain used to behave, that's exactly how we used to operate.
Yeah, these are all pre-World War II kind of playbook of actually we'll just have that, thank you very much, and if you could just step aside, that would be very handy.
But the other thing that's fascinating from this guy Cole is that again, he said this is where international law's dead, because international law you can't go in except in self-defense. Point 2, international law, head of state immunity. Heads of state are immune from being basically whipped out in exactly the way that happens. see, his thought was that the sort of abduction isn't so strong an issue because how you're brought to court is irrelevant, which I still think is staggering. But nonetheless, that they expect that Maduro will claim head of state immunity, and that will push against international law. But I mean, the thing that's quite astonishing with it, at the end of this interview, this professor, and if people have been watching social media, they'll have watched an ordinary punter in the street doing a little interview about Venezuela, who during the interview is lifted by guys who come out of a car and just wheel her off for obstructing the highway.
Yeah.
But the last bit, so this guy, you're really putting your head over the parapet when you say stuff like this. At the end of this interview, he said, so this is why, essentially, Trump is getting away with murder of people to engage in an illegal abduction. So, I mean, if a guy who's a professor can say that, you would just hope, naively perhaps, that this would be the moment. And of course, we can lob in Greenland now.
Well, I was just about to come to Greenland. I mean, there's a lot of speculation over the last few days about Greenland and various tweets that different people have been putting out saying, Greenland's next, or putting a US flag over Greenland, and various people in the US administration refusing to rule out military force in the takeover of Greenland.
But I mean, we have been here before, but we have also been here before of kind of thinking that this might not happen, both with Ukraine. Here we are with the actions in Venezuela. So you can't discount all of this. But quite obviously, as anybody will realise, as Greenland is still weirdly part of the territory of Denmark, and Denmark's a member of NATO, that's the end of NATO. And I mean, again, technically, if a NATO member is invaded, never mind that it's by another NATO member, but nonetheless, what arguably NATO members have signed up to with Article 5 is that if another member state is invaded, they must all come to its aid. Which means that, I mean, in one way of looking at it, if Trump did invade Greenland, it would be incumbent on all the other NATO members to come to Greenland's rescue.
Yeah.
Which is unthinkably what?
I mean, I think Greenland is in a different order of magnitude, and the fact that it is part of the Kingdom of Denmark will offer it significant protection. It's a European nation, it's a NATO ally. This, again, seems to be more of the Trump negotiating tactic. I talk about storming in and show how I can do that, in the hope that I'll get some lesser trade-off. And I think that these issues, whilst heightened, are still very, very separate, and that seems to be kind of where some of the major commentators are coming to at the minute. And I noticed that Keir Starmer was much quicker to back Denmark and to talk about the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark and Greenland, and say that the future of Greenland was up to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark and nobody else. So I don't see the US actually having a military incursion. Whether it decides it's going to expand its army bases there, which the Danes seem to be up for negotiating, is perhaps up for discussion. But I think this is more of the Trump push as far as you can go, and see what they'll give you in order to buy you off.
Well, we did talk about Greenland before, and I mean, all of that, yeah, there might be a point where there is a kind of secondary purpose in this to try to get the same sort of deal that Trump forced Ukraine to accept, where there was a trade. It's so nakedly, God, it just beggars
it's a shakedown,
belief, but
effectively.
Yeah, but I mean, it was basically, to get the last lot of support, Ukrainians were just going to have to accept that the Americans would horse off their rare earth minerals and so on. So there's the precedent with that. They're probably thinking the same. We could do a bit the same with Greenland. But it also strikes me, it's like a deflection. I mean, what he also does is, when he's done something gobsmackingly illegal, like the Venezuelan situation, Then he runs Greenland as a little sideline so that we're all kind of jumping on that one. And actually, people will have heard of the Monroe Doctrine that's been kind of scattered about, which I had a wee look at. It actually dates from 1823, and it was basically a kind of part of the US foreign policy warning European powers not to engage in further colonization of the Western Hemisphere. Essentially saying, look, the Americas are over here, Europe's over there. We won't interfere in European affairs in return for you just leaving the Americas to get on with it. It sounds obviously like that was the beginning of American muscle, but also Latin American countries, some of them apparently, who had just emerged from colonial rule, wanted to be sure that there wasn't going to be any Portuguese or Spanish intervention in their lives again. But still, 1823, we're going back to with this. And Greenland obviously then is the odd one out because it's sitting on the American continent, such as it's not sitting on a massive body of ice, but still it's on that side of the large shch, as you might say. And yet it's European in its ownership, which, this is also, if you look, if there is any logic operating with Donald Trump, and if he means anything by that Monroe Doctrine, then it's sort of said the Americas are he tweeted that last night, didn't he, or something? The Americas belongs to us. But I mean, at that point, it meant the Americas belongs to the American countries, plural, to administer without European interference. But I mean, this. I also heard an interesting interview. I think it could have been Martin Geisler interviewing John Swinney. No, it wasn't actually. It was Andrew Marr on LBC. And Andrew Marr was kind of putting to John Swinney that what this kind of proves is that small countries are tremendously vulnerable. And would this be a time to be becoming a small independent country? And I don't know John should have sort of batted it back over the fence, really. But when you think about it, just thinking about what you said there, Greenland's kind of strength is that it belongs to a larger country of Denmark, which is almost exactly the same population size as Scotland.
Yeah, quite incredible.
So there's one thing, and the other thing is how many. What big countries will do is they don't usually. And well, here's the next contradiction: Ukraine. Anyone want to call that a small country? Exactly. It's massive. Yeah. From memory, it's 40 million. I can't remember 40 million people, and freaking huge, right? So, but generally speaking, the larger countries will start trying to nibble at one of the smaller ones. If Russia had wanted to do that, there's the Estonians, 1.1 million people only, but NATO members. So the point being, this is usually what provokes other countries to sort of decide they have to come to the rescue. I mean, in many respects, I know it's not the same, but the situation facing Ireland after British Brexit, well, it's English Brexit, sort of motivated the rest of Europe actually to put extra effort into solving some sort of deal for the whole island of Ireland. They could have looked at it and thought, that's like, I don't know, is it 5 million people tops? Why are we going to? We're going to
there's a kind of edge of us that's not contiguous. Yeah,
but it's not, because it was basically totemic, as well as the Irish blooming run everything as far as I can see in the EU. They're little minxes. So there's all sorts of substrata within this, but it just sounded very much like this belief that big is beautiful, big is well defended, and so on. And here we are sitting with all sorts of kind of nuclear weapons that we can't even be sure we have complete control over. I mean, to be fair, that was something raised recently by several broadcasters. If we're getting to the stage where NATO would collapse if Trump is serious about Greenland, that's the end of NATO. And then we've got a whole bunch of weapons sitting here that have to be serviced in the United States. So, there's a big, big moment. It's been coming a long time. We've talked about it before. But, this is Europe's moment to have to step up and come together on a whole load of stuff, because otherwise we're just sitting watching this ping pong going over our heads now between the old superpowers.
And there's an interview with Stephen Miller the other day, the Deputy Chief of Staff the US president, after his wife had tweeted that image with the US flag over Greenland, basically saying, by what right do they hold this anyway? And kind of sort of echoing some of the things that you're saying there, this kind of bizarre juxtaposition of, well, it's closer to us than it is to you, therefore we don't see why you should get it. And just ramping up that rhetoric. And I think that's potentially what they're going to start pushing on. But there are much more serious consequences in annoying a sort of cohesive bloc like Europe, rather than attacking a Latin American country like Venezuela, which is not surrounded, doesn't have the same kind of support structures within the Southern America, and is not as militarily strong or economically strong as the European bloc. So, I mean, I think this is mostly
it's almost as if it's like Trump has been what's the thing where you get frozen for ages and wake up 100, 200 years later? Cryogenically frozen or something. Because it's almost like he's back in the days, when we talked about this before, the United States was made out of just seizing territory and then buying them from other, I'm trying to remember now from all the notes, but, I think there was all sorts of purchases. I think they bought Alaska.
The Louisiana purchase,
1867 from Russia.
Yep.
So that's how they got Alaska. They bought New Mexico. They bought Louisiana from the French. Clues in the name. They bought Florida from Spain in 1821. So it's like it's as if Trump is basically still, his mind is still there with that Monroe Doctrine 1823. He's basically sitting in the 1820s with that sort of outlook that you can just buy and bully your way to what you want. Nothing has happened in the meantime. He's been cryogenically frozen and he's just woken up with these attitudes. But having said all of that, this might well be where the Putin-Trump axis sort of joins at the back, because they both believe the same thing. They both believe they can just go in and take what they want. And it's all the kind of namby-pamby flapping around international law, all this kind of, boring stuff. Those are the guys who are the problems, because, that doesn't reflect the way the real world works.
Yeah,
and
you get your lawyers, I'll get my tanks. We'll see.
Yes, and I'm not sure where you could chuck China in with that, because, 1 minute everybody's trying to cozy up. And on the other hand, they're obviously the massive power that could threaten the old big two. So, dearie me.
Indeed. But closer to home is Anas Sarwar for First Minister.
Well, you wouldn't have thought so, would you? But yes, he had a wee launch of a campaign yesterday with against the most enormous Saltire flag. It just was the whole backdrop to everything. And
his was straight. John Squinny's had a kind of strange break in the way it had been plastered on the wall.
Well, the thing that it just struck me that if you're going to have a change of direction, and clearly there's no mention of Keir Starmer now, there's almost no mention of Labour. They've just decided it's going to have to be Anas Sarwar, and it's going to be he is now draping himself in the flag. Now, if he draped himself in a tiny flag earlier, or just even had a sort of Saltire handkerchief or something, that could have eased this transition a bit. But it's so stark. To have gone from the Union Jack kind of uber alles to suddenly we're sitting here with, I see no union. I'm sitting here with a Saltire. So I can't see how that's going to work myself. But everybody's got their, is trying to put their best foot forward. And boy, is it boring. Geez, I texted you. I'm pretty sure you didn't sit up and watch Scotland Tonight's debate with them all.
I haven't watched it, although I think it's worth bottoming out this for a little bit before we go and talk about how they all fared yesterday. It's back to the old analysis about Welsh Labour and how Welsh Labour, because they hated Tony Blair, were much better at actually kind of standing up for Wales and had a hinterland of standing up for Wales. The Scottish Labour Party, or the branch office of Labour in Scotland, has no hinterland, has no real deep-seated credibility on any of these issues. Anas hasn't really been pushed forward as a kind of electoral asset, or it certainly doesn't feel like that to me over the last, year or 2 years. And all of a sudden, with 4 months to go, 2 days before the beginning of the regulated campaign, all of a sudden we've kind of changed everything over. You've got him with the big saltire background going, and of course I'm sticking up for Scotland, and all of the kind of material that's come out of late, and of course they've all had to kind of line up properly, and all the candidates. So I mean, everybody in their own local area is probably seeing YouTube adverts. I certainly had a Facebook ad the other day of the local Labour candidate. It's an ass hour for First Minister, and he wasn't talking about Labour or Labour policies or anything like that. He was just talking about an ass. And I can't imagine, if you polled very many people, that an ass has that great a favourability rating that it would actually make you think that this was a strong electoral asset, and kind of shifting to this more presidential style campaign would be the way to go. So it does suggest a certain degree of nervousness, and the latest polling in the National had them falling behind the Greens in terms of their potential seat take. So
yeah,
it's a lot to watch here, and I just think it's going to be a bit too cat-handed and a bit too last minute. Nobody's actually had that kind of embedded with them, and it doesn't feel natural. And when it doesn't feel natural, it's not going to come across well in the campaign as the campaign heats up.
I think the way that happens is, what's the problem for Scottish Labour? It's Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
It's a person, and okay, it's all the policies of Keir Starmer, blah, 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 but that's all encompassed in one guy, Keir Starmer. So what's the way you shift that is, because you can't do policies or anything because you've got no control over anything, basically, and you're not going to move the dial particularly. It's got to be another person. So the only other person available is Annas. And I mean, every time anybody from Labour's on, and Annas particularly, they cite that by-election that I keep forgetting which one it is. They're both Hamiltons, but whatever the second one was, where they weren't expected to win, and where Reform also had a really horrible kind of go at Annas in a sort of racist way that backfired. So, I mean, the kind of myth that's around, well, it's not a myth, it's a reality that they won it. But what story has been told out of that is, you mess with Annas Sarwar at your peril. There's a wee guy that can go in and, against all the odds, can, pull victory from the jaws of defeat and so on. Now, obviously, it's hard to do that at a Scottish election when all 73 seats are in play. No, it's more, 73 is Westminster, 129 or something. Yeah. So that's difficult. And it's also debatable how much it was Annas and not the fact that half of the Labour Party seemed to camp out in that constituency for 2 months. But
and
anyway,
everybody knew Big Davy Russell, and he's your man.
He was in the bowling club. He served in the hospice as a volunteer, all of the above, right? But nonetheless, out of that, and this is always what happens in politics, is that some story develops that's semi-plausible if you don't look too closely, which is where most people are at. With a sort of, it was Annas what won it. So if you're kind of coasting on airy kind of fabrications like that, you might as well, given that you've got no alternative, you might as well try and fluff up Annas, and of course he's come out with this thing where he's challenged John Swinney to have a kind of direct debate with him in each of the, I can't remember how many regions he's decided there is. I guess it's all the list regions.
Yeah.
Face to face and everything. I mean, again, as you say, with reality intervening on the polling front, and the Greens kind of saying, it would be a bit odd, wouldn't it, for the party that's likely to come forth debating with the party that's going first? I mean, like, what about us?
Also, that's kind of setting the scene. You're going down, and you think you can sort of dictate the grounds of how this election is going to be run.
But that feeds into the punchy little, nobody puts Annas in the corner, mixing up with dirty dancing metaphors. Anyway, all of that stuff. But I noticed, however, this Substack thing that Peter Kellner does is really very interesting. And he's weighed in with a new one saying that Labour at a UK level might not be as over as everyone thinks. And he's saying, I'm not unaware of all the polling results, but he's pointing out that despite the fact that the party ended 25 with 18% support, which is the joint lowest of any government party. The last one was Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister in 2009. But anyway, so they ended up with the lowest polling. the loss of votes was actually not the biggest that there's been. I know this sounds like it's clutching at straws, but his point is that Labour has not fallen further than any other government. It's had a 17-point drop, exceeded by the Conservatives when Thatcher was Prime Minister in the 1980s, by Sunak during his election campaign. And his point, which he's made before, is that what's important is what happened to these governments after they hit that rock bottom. And what he's saying is that they had to do something that suggested a dramatically different direction. There was Brexit for Boris, which was very different. I'm trying to scoot through all the rest of the examples. Can't find them fast enough. Falklands, that kind of gave a horrible boost to Margaret Thatcher and to John Major. There was turnarounds in policy and of course people that made things a lot easier to do. And he's saying this is where the big problem is with Labour, thinking that steady as we go is kind of going to, get them anywhere. He says this is precisely the wrong conclusion, that there's no example of that having worked. The only thing is to change leader. Obviously, it's not going to happen, I guess, before May, because anybody just has to take all these really bad results with them if they are going to have a change. So why would you change beforehand? Because it would just lumber the new person with what is inevitably going to be a pelting. Or you need some utter wow factor. I mean, really big wow. And he suggests the big wow is rejoining the EU. So I take it from that silence that you're either not there or
dumbfounded by that idea that they're going to. I mean, obviously, Wes Streeting has very much kind of sidled himself up to the idea of joining the customs union without necessarily being in the single market. But
any of the, sort of essentially say that you're going to do it.
Yeah.
If elected, what Labour will do is either join the customs union or go the whole Monty and go all the way in and say it's been the biggest disaster ever. It's wrecked our economy. It's stopped freedom of movement, which has wrecked all sorts of sectors that haven't got enough skilled people. It's left us out in the cold when quite clearly you need to be in a bigger, you need to talk to Europe on all sorts of issues beyond just loose defence talk. Now, I'm not saying this is a thing to do or a great policy for Labour, but just that, his Peter Kellner's view is he would have to come so far off the ropes. That's how far you would have to come off the ropes to create what just happened there, which is silence from Fraser Thompson for at least 10 seconds, right? Yes. But it's not going to happen.
It's certainly not going to happen. Starmer is not capable of that, so it will.
No, he's not. There's your problem. Coming full square back to Anas Sarwar. That's how much he's still anchored, to a guy who is going down.
And he's going to be asked about that
down
in every single interview. In fact, I've just see that Gina Miller has just done that in the last 20 minutes. Basically, well, that's all very well and good, Mr. Sarwar, but what about the rest of it? And I don't see how you can compete against that. And that's the issue with national campaigns. It's not fair, and nobody sits properly and analyses what you're actually saying and what you might do. It's very much a kind of mood music, big headwind type affair. And if the mood music's not with you and the winds are blowing in the wrong direction, it's very difficult to overcome that. And that's obviously what happened in the recent UK general election. The whole media message of that campaign, even about a year out, was we're going to have a change of government. And this is how we're going to have a change of government. The national messaging now at a UK level is that Labour are terrible and everything they do is cack-handed. And I don't see how Anas Sarwar can carve out a space sufficiently large enough under that. And he's certainly in no position to start criticising. And of course, from the opposite direction, you've got the UK party saying, of course, we're only doing this because of Anas. And that, you're so kind of deeply wedded to that message, it's impossible to break out from it. You know,
Yeah.
it was an asked for it.
So what did you make of that? If you watched it as well, then, I mean, this is no, well done for Scotland Tonight to gather them. Colin
Yeah.
Mackay, as ever, got in and about them and all the rest of it. But my God, I mean, it's all these debates are quite depressing, really. There's hardly anything big or, out of it.
I think, when you've got, I thought it was interesting that when you're important enough a party like Labour, even though you are polling fourth, you get to not send your top person. So, I mean, obviously it was Keith Brown rather than John Swinney, and it was Jackie Bailey rather than Anas Sarwar, whether you had Malcolm Offord on as leader of Reform and Gillian Mackay as co-leader of the Greens.
And Alex Cole-Hamilton for Lib Dems.
I know, but we tried to block that from our minds. It's just too awful to contemplate. So...
they're still observing those niceties. They don't put, it's leaders against leaders and deputies against deputies. So there's all of that. But I mean, I thought Keith Brown for the SNP sort of sat kind of back out of it quite a lot of the time and just let them all, argue. And then just came back in to sort of say, okay, so, there's problems with the NHS. We've got to say they've now had 6 months or something where they haven't got people waiting. The numbers who are on waiting lists for more than a year has come down. You've got to say, I mean, having just gone on a new waiting list myself this morning, essentially, I've had a bit of just all sorts of knee, leg kind of joint issues. But so I've gone off seeing a podiatrist and onto the physiotherapy waiting list. And she did say to me at the end of it, you really might want to try and take some steps yourself, first, because it could be a very long time. So, okay, it'll be a year. That's what it looks like. And I guess if you've got a few bob and you don't want to be in pain for a year and you need some help just to kind of guide you as to what you can do yourself, I'll be off doing something else. But nonetheless, I contribute to that. And I mean, the number of people who are stiff, I've got joint pain in the past. I had a granny who just was in agony the whole time with arthritis and never went to the doctor once because nobody expected anything to be done about it. So anyway, all of that sits at the back of this, these narking about the numbers, what's reasonable to expect without any extra money. So the Tories are still trying to say that this can be done with no extra resources. Reform, equally, I read you from their leaflet, they're going to cut public spending. Labour, not very clear about how they're going to manage to turn stuff around. I mean, what's the nature of the beast about how you would run the NHS differently? And so it becomes this sort of just unfollowable argument about numbers and targets. And essentially it just boils down to the SNP have run this place for nigh on 20 years, it'll soon be. And, there's people waiting for stuff. So there's a reality. What is the real debate behind that? Should we be able to make comparisons internationally to say whether that's good, bad, or indifferent? Should we be able to home in on something and say, can we focus on this and suggest that this might be one of the reasons that we're so ill, like inequality and poverty, which constantly pushes up your illness rates? Can we talk about these things? I mean, funnily enough, your man Offord is the only one who sort of branches off into that territory with dodgy kind of, comments that he rapidly backtracks on when someone focuses on, so you're basically saying nobody really needs any state aid, are you? Oh, no, I wasn't really kind of saying that. But
he's got a really tricky job to do, I think, actually. Not that I, have any sympathy for him in that. Because at the back of your mind, you have to think, what do my racist supporters think? Or what do they want to... So, I mean, he was basically saying, most of our electoral base comes from hardworking people who are, working multiple jobs and are in poverty and are kind of working poor, whilst kind of wanting to take a swipe at them at the same time. And he's constantly kind of reprofile and retriangulate. And every time he sort of uttered a sentence and somebody else kind of came in, he had to sort of refine, what I actually meant by that was blah, 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 blah. What I did think was that he completely squeezed out Craig Hoy, who's not normally one for being squeezed anywhere.
I've got to say, do you remember I had a very amusing encounter with Craig on some debate night or question time?
Was this
when
the Luke
when I asked him if
Taylor?
he'd fallen asleep.
Oh, yes, fell
You know,
asleep, yes.
because I was speaking. You know, it's so boring when you're not speaking yourself.
Yeah.
It's a totally sweet moment. I'll tell you, all the sweeter when you're up close and you see the
I could
absolute look of
just imagine,
bewilderment
yeah.
in somebody's eyes when they just had stopped listening. But anyway, he does usually, you're quite right, he
Yeah.
hangs on in there.
So I thought at the end of the programme, I thought, God, we're going to have 4 months of this kind of 6 or 7 way rammying. And I like you, I thought Keith Brown did quite well to just kind of, they seem to have better stats. We've got actually a slightly better story from the SNP for the turn of the year. I noticed that John Swinney was able to quote from the Moody's ranking, you know, and the new credit rating, and flipped the quote from Burns, you know, the gift to see ourselves as others see us, which is normally about actually seeing you in a negative light. He was actually, you know, for the you know, the dafty Presbyterian Scots, actually you're better than you think you are. And if you actually were able to see, just a bit like you're doing in the Norway film, people going, yeah, Scotland's great. It gives you a kind of boost that you weren't expecting. So there were some quite good lines developing out of that, I felt, and there certainly seemed to be a bit more defensiveness on the performance of NHS Scotland and the economy and what have you. Whether it actually bears up to stronger scrutiny is a moot point, but they were much more bullish about it, and whilst the rest of them just kind of scrabbled around, he was able just to kind of come in and be very sort of party of government over the top.
Yeah. I thought actually Gillian Mackay was very good
Yes.
for the Greens. And I don't know whether this is a right-on thing to say or not, but Gillian is deaf. So, I mean, I've done quite a number of independency things with her, and I was completely astonished. I mean, she's managing to lip read everything. I thought she actually lip read me when I had my back turned to her. I thought, God, that's a new one, actually. But she's, I think she's a young mum. So it was this kind of, I know that's not, that in itself is not enough, but it's kind of, you know, the beginnings of, that's somebody that's in it, you know, overcoming quite a lot of.
Well, she was the only person that really
difficulty.
able to articulate
Human
why we had to
problems.
have tax and why we needed, you know, so
Yeah.
we'll actually keep, but that pays for all the services
Solidarity
that people
and
use and,
yeah.
you know, keeps us cohesive. And
But there's a thing about this as well, because the polls suggest, you know, as people will be aware, there's going to be an independence majority, likely, unless anything goes dramatically wrong.
Yeah.
And the Greens could end up being the third largest party after Reform. And they'll get, you know, was it 13 to 17 MSPs, depending on whatever. So what are the SNP going to do? Because they won't have a majority. They will need to. If they're going for another 4 or 5 years, I'm always mixed up. It's 4 years, isn't it?
5 years.
There you are. That's why I keep getting mixed up. So 5 years. You can't do, well, you can try, but doing that just on a sort of basis of an agreement when you've got that big a grouping there. Now, of course, John Swinney's gone for this, you know, we're going for gold, we're going to get 65. And, you know, everybody's having to defend contentions by their leaders, which are pretty hard to defend. As Keith Brown was, you know, saying, yes, we can get there. Well, okay, I guess now people have discounted the tilt that people make for elections as having any kind of really credible thing in it. I mean, we've still got Anna Sauer saying he's going to be First Minister. Yeah, right. You know, you've still got kind of the Tories saying that they can be the official opposition. Yeah, right. You know, so everybody's got stuff that they're coming away with that doesn't really sort of add up. But the SNP and the Greens will have to do some big boy and girl stuff there. And I mean, I volunteered this thought in the Good Morning Scotland, whatever they call it these days, Good Morning Scotland on Saturday. And the folk that were on with me at the time were very sort of disparaging about this, and that the Greens were beyond the pale, and that, you know, all the stuff they'd introduced had been a catalogue of disasters, and, you know, we needed to get back on with oil, and these guys were just going to be a millstone round your neck. Other outlooks are available, but the point is, if the arithmetic is sitting that way, they're all going to have to deal with one another. I would
Indeed.
have thought.
Yeah, and it's going to be a much more fractured Holyrood than previously, and you've got Reform in there as an extra party. What it did hit home as well, I think, last night on STV is that, you know, if you're not on there, nobody's going to see you. So, Independence for Scotland, the Alb Party, who are only choosing to run on the list as a strategic aim so as not to annoy convicted SNP voters, so that they're purely wanting to be there in the regional competition and see themselves not in interfering or potentially having any possibility, like the Greens will potentially do in Edinburgh Central, of denying the SNP a constituency seat. You just can't get seen. And if you're not on telly and you're not in the media, you're not going to get the traction that you require. And it doesn't matter how much more closely aligned Alba is to the views of the kind of majority of yesers. It's going to be very difficult to see any kind of electoral breakthrough, and they're not having any showing at all at the moment in the polls.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you'd have to say is, after all the talk of Anas Sarwar, he'll be gone. Because how if he does, now he's going for broke. So, if Labour do come fourth or third even, I can't see how he stays on. And the same would be true for your man Finlay for the Tories, wouldn't it?
I would think so. I mean, the Tories, I suppose, are going to have an existential crisis and potentially be reduced in such considerable numbers that who would want to be the leader of the group? And you might actually see potentially more defections into reform from the new elected crop of sitting Conservative MSPs, just to kind of get into something that's moving forward and being successful. I don't think you could do that straight away after the back of an election, having stand for a political party and then jumping ship straight after you've been elected would be just beyond the pale. But it might happen over the course of the Parliament. The Scottish Conservatives have the potential to become completely irrelevant and kind of pushed into kind of Lib Dem prospectus, while everybody else kind of floats up a bit.
So anyway, there'll be sort of 5 months of this.
Yes, hooray! It's super exciting. I'm sure everybody out there can hardly wait. And all officially kicks off tomorrow. So anything that's arrived today will not be counted in the big
God,
spend.
you could take the boy out of the parliamentary office, but you cannot take the office out of the boy, can you?
Well, normally at this point you've arranged for some very expensive postal thing to go out, and you're just praying that it all arrives when it's supposed to do, and that it gets there, before the cut-off rather than after the cut-off, and you discover you've got thousands of pounds worth of things that are now unaccounted for in the amount that you're allowed to spend, being kind of brought into, the other side of the balance sheet, and then your printer phones you and says, "Oh, we've had a wee bit of a problem." And you're like, "I do not want to bloody hear this." So it's all good fun, and I'm sure the campaign teams will be ramping up. It will be interesting to see what the SNP go for. And as I was watching John Swinney still pretending that he was going to get an absolute majority and having quite an independence-heavy, joyfully launch speech the other day, I did wonder what they will use as their emblem on the ballot paper. So in the most recent Holyrood and Westminster elections have just stuck to just a pure SNP clutie, but they do have two alternative emblems registered with the Electoral Commission, which is SNP Independence or SNP for Independence, and whether we'll actually see that hit the ballot paper will kind of give a strong indication as to whether this is a really serious push by the party for a fresh referendum, or whether we're just kind of churning out same old.
So can I invite you to put 10 pence on one of those ones?
I think we're going to see SNP for Independence.
Really?
And I think, but cynically, I think that's just to drive up the list vote. It'll be a bit like Alex Hammond for First Minister, and that people who were tempted and who logically and quite sensibly would vote Alba or possibly even Green will maybe see that SNP for Independence and go, right, okay.
It doesn't seem to be the case then that having, stating quite clearly that you're going for independence, flushes off those kind of wobbly voters.
Well, that's the other possibility, that obviously that you people who are more likely to vote for you because they see you as a competent government in contrast to other parties. I think probably the majority of them have already peeled off.
Yeah.
And then that's not so much of an issue. People in the past have quite safely voted for the SNP because they thought there was no prospect of there being a second independence referendum, or no prospect of the campaign being pushed forward. Will have by this point peeled off to Reform, or potentially even to the Labour Party. Mm-hmm.
Well, it looks like Angela Constance is going to appear in Holyrood any time now. To probably say that she's staying, actually. You were the one that noticed this.
That seems to be the fact. So I haven't looked into the full ins and outs of this, but I think the First Minister's ministerial code advisors now have the right of initiative, unlike in the UK where it's the Prime Minister has to say, could you look at this? I think in Scotland they have the right of initiative. They can look into things off their own bat, and decided to investigate Angela Constance around the statement she'd made about, is it Alexis J?
Yeah.
The expert on the grooming gangs, and then the kind of entrapment that she suffered when she was in front of committee, where she admitted that she had had a private conversation to apologise to her and ditched her officials when she was undertaking activity as a government minister, and under the ministerial code should have had an official with her to note what had happened. It sounds as though, having made that determination and presented the findings to the First Minister yesterday, she was at Cabinet this morning, and after a bit of kind of fevered speculation on Twitter, because it was announced that she was making a ministerial statement unexpectedly today in the Chamber, which I suppose will probably come in an hour or so, it now seems to be kind of senior SNP sources are saying that she's absolutely not resigning and she's going to be staying.
And just to say, there's two things that are kind of stuff that was, of interest last year, legislation-wise. There's the Community Wealth Building Bill is sitting at stage 2 in Holyrood. That's the one that would put a duty on ministers to show how they would reduce inequality and support wealth creation in local and regional economies. Now, this was one that Pat particularly was very keen on, it having been done in Preston and other places where big institutions like councils, hospitals, etc., could procure stuff from the local community, from cooperatives, businesses or whatever, and basically keep the wealth within that community. So it's a great, nobody can seem to find anything wrong with that. Of course, there will be, there was a previous ruling, the Best Value Initiative, which actually I think John Swinney in his last time in the job was the one that put it out, because I do remember him having to clarify it by saying it wasn't just a race to the bottom to get the cheapest bid, because that's exactly what was happening. And many councils, I think, felt they were obliged to do, just take the cheapest offer, which was, just created all sorts of bad outcomes. So anyway, community wealth building, it might get in before the CHOP, but the one that should get in is the assisted dying bill, which is at stage 3. So that's gone through all its committee stages and blah, 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 and now it's coming back for a vote in the final debate, which I'm sure will be an emotional one. There's been a change made. The minimum age has moved from 16 to 18. There could be other amendments put into it. But I know for many people who have sat and watched anyone having a terrible death, the first thing that comes into your mind is we need to get this thing done. So despite the opposition of John Swinney, I can't remember, was Nicola Sturgeon, for all that's relevant, she's not even in it.
Yeah, she's not.
But either. Still, there's an awful lot of stuff on one side of this debate, and yet the experience of many people sits very strongly on the other. But that one looks like it should get through before the cut-off for the election.
Yeah, well, we'll keep everybody posted on that. Do you have any updates on cinema dates for the film?
Oh, indeed. Well, yeah, the film is, it's kind of, I'll pull this all together a wee bitty, but it seems to be going into the Cameo in February, Perth, Dundee, all sorts of places, Nairn, Inverness, but not Glasgow. Just can't find anywhere that wants it in Glasgow. So if anybody from the Glasgow Film Theatre is listening, I'm sorry to be just sort of hounding you, but could you reply? Because then I would know what's doing.
You'll be back for 2 days. Get your act together.
Yeah, come on, let's do it. And if not, we'll have to find some other sort of venue as before. So yes, it's all going to roll out probably towards the end of January and February. And I'm really hoping the number of named storms I have to go through and
and that Lyme's disease and
hopefully not Lyme disease anymore, but still it will be minimised.
I just remember walking you back from the previous one at the Cameo, and you said, I just don't feel well at all, and I must just be exhausted. And then sort of 3 days later, you were like, well, I was exhausted, but because I had also had Lyme's disease.
Oh, God, right. You see, it's all a blur to me. It was just, everything was like walking through walls of generalised pain. Anyway, but still, what are you going to do? If you've got sort of stiff joints or you've got sort of problems with that, you're going to sit around moping, you know what I mean? It's always better to get up and at it and go, as long as you don't infect anybody else with it. Happily, Lyme disease is not infectious.
Yeah, unless you're a tick.
So, yes, let's see where that tick.
Grant, well, it's not up on the events space on the website yet, but hopefully will be.
Tisk, says Fraser.
By the end
get
of
your arse in gear, Riddoch. Right,
well,
you are.
By next week's podcast, we'll be able to point everybody to that then. But for the moment, you'll just have to hold your wheesht and
and then it will go online after that. I think it's true still that the cinemas prefer to have something that can't be seen elsewhere, particularly now because actually museums, cinemas, they're all seeing really big problems staying afloat actually because post-COVID the habits have just gone. So I'm pretty sure they will prefer that to be March or something, that we basically put the film online. And I'm sorry it seems to have taken forever. The folk who did donate to making the film possible have already had the link to the film as a private thingy. So that's where we are, and it'll be good fun.
Grant. Well, on that very good news for the new year, particularly the message that if it's not stopping you, just get out there and do it. We will see you next week, champs.